Thanks, Neil. My name's David Pollard. I'm the CEO of the Australian Forest Products Association. We are the industry association based in Canberra that represents the bulk of the industry, growers, processors and manufacturers. We've been around in one form or another for a long time, and the industry that we represent has been around for a long time. It's an industry that is smaller than it used to be. It's currently probably about 1% of national income, so approximately the size of the dairying industry or one of those primary industries. It is a kind of legacy industry that was a pioneer industry in the late 19th and early 20th century, but it has hit a series of problems that it has attempted to deal with, sometimes well, sometimes not so well, sometimes through factors beyond its control and sometimes not. So what I want to say very briefly, and I'll try to keep this short, is to talk about the industry's response to this Act, because the industry, of course, is the subject of this Act, and it has had a response which has been broadly quite positive. So what I want to talk about is really the aims of the legislation as we see it, some ongoing concerns such as they are, and an overview of a number of issues that drop out of the Act, including regulatory control in Australia, environmentally sustainable forest management systems and Australia's best practice, the fact that illegal logging is actually not a local problem, and the extent of government-mandated due diligence that is already in place, and an assurance that we will build on the cooperative approach of the department to date. And I must say that the department's handling of this proposal and bill and act has been, I think, exemplary. It's a very great example of industry-government cooperation. So the Act itself, has already been said, aims to support international efforts to prevent the trade in illegally logged timber, to stop the degradation of tropical rainforests, to reduce harmful environmental, social and economic effects. And it's a high-level legislative framework to combat illegal logging. As Paul said, it was passed in November 2012, and from the 29th of November, it is prohibited to import illegally logged timber or timber products and to domestically process illegally logged raw logs. And from 2014, importers and processors must conduct due diligence for regulated timber products, so none of that's a surprise. The regulation is currently being developed and will take a very long time. It will be tabled by the end of May, that's 2013. It's not really going to happen in the 22nd century, one hopes. And the DAF working group process is intended to define what regulated wood products are, what due diligence is, what the monitoring and enforcement processes in place will be, with a view to a final regulation package on the 27th of March 2013. As I said, DAF has engaged in very broad consultations with the industry. It's been very highly responsive to industry feedback. Staff of the department have been hosted to industry visits, and we think that they have actually now, perhaps they always did, but they certainly have now a very thorough appreciation of the relevant variables within the industry. So, all in all, the industry supports the intent of the Act. We think that it starts to level the playing field between domestic processors and imports. It forces importers to address the issues of legality, which they have not had to this point, whereas domestic producers have had to through state law, through codes of forest practice and through certification. It begins to address, in other words, the question about the sustainability of imports, whereas we have been fully occupied as an industry to this point in the sustainability of domestically produced product. Therefore, it underpins good practice by others. There are some remaining concerns that the industry has, though, which it would be useful to state. One is that there is already a very high level of domestic regulation, and that may be under-recognised. Of course, the regulation of the industry is predominantly a state problem, although increasingly federal, as in so many areas of public policy in this country. The WTO requirements may be over-recognised, and it's our belief that there's no justification for additional costs or additional regulation. Additional costs and additional regulation actually amount to the same thing. So the more the industry is regulated, the more costs rise and the more uncompetitive the industry becomes. And of course, it increases the scope for vexatious litigation. That is to say, people taking elements of the industry to court just to mess up their operations. The Australian industry, certainly the growing of it and the processing of it, operates in a kind of bifurcated atmosphere between natural forestry and planted forestry. And the environmentally sustainable forest management systems that we have, which provide a kind of holistic framework, are recognised as world best practice. Our hope and expectation is the Commonwealth Government, the central government, must exercise discipline in taking over what are essentially state responsibilities. The industry does not want to see itself micromanaged by the Commonwealth as it enforces a legal regime that is already in place. And it is a plea to rely on existing processes to support due diligence requirements. So there is already a rigorous set of requirements on the industry that have been in place and growing for many years. As I say, it's possibly the most regulated industry, forest industry in the world, and the question is what more we can add to it that would improve the effectiveness of it. The answer being very little. At the end of the day, illegal logging is not a problem in Australia. It's a problem of imports. Here's a homely photograph of a logging operation. What you see there is the fact that logs are tabled, numbered, and the grower knows where the log has come from. The grower knows where the log ends up. Australia, therefore, I'll repeat, has a robust regulatory framework which we need to acknowledge. It's based on rigorous monitoring and enforcement. The legality of it in Australia is inherent in the regulatory framework itself. The focus has been and continues to be on sustainability, and legality as such really is a minimum requirement, because in Australia what the industry delivers is something vastly bigger than mere legality. The legality requirements within the Act, we believe, are a very low bar, and our domestic requirements already far exceed and have long far exceeded those of the Act. Here's a homely quote from Indufor, which is a Finnish research company, comparing selected forest certification standards, and the conclusion is that Canada and Australia are the countries with the most comprehensive legislation, and at the end of the day, Australian legislation is the most comprehensive among all those that it's studied. So we have third-party verification of that. Certification is a hugely important element of the industry in Australia. As you probably know, we have two certification systems operating in Australia, and we, Australian Forest Products Association, are members of the Forest Stewardship Council. I am on the board of the Australian Forestry Standard, which is the rival certification system. At the end of the day, really, there's not a lot to choose between the two systems. If you put them side by side, you'd be very hard put to say really what the operational differences are. Nevertheless, the two systems don't have a happy relationship, unfortunately, and the industry itself is largely certified in Australia, as distinct from the rest of the world. We have 90% of the industry certified in Australia to one of the two standards, but globally there's less than 10% of total world forests that are certified. certification already offers independent international recognition of environmental sustainability, and legality is embedded within that as a basic requirement. So certification is not just a proxy for legality, it goes far beyond that. And we would like to see the fact of certification used more extensively in the Australian forestry framework. Even the FSC ranks Australia as a low risk for illegally logged timber. Our view then is that there is no justification for any additional cost or regulatory burden on the domestic industry. It's just not necessary. The department itself acknowledges that the industry is very tightly regulated and that that level of control is important for Australia's reputation. As I said, legality is inherent already in the environmentally sustainable forest management system that we have, and we believe that the Act should build on the strength of our already existing regime, not attempt to duplicate it, and therefore increase regulatory burden and therefore raise costs. There is a risk, therefore, as I said earlier, with the imported side of the industry. In 2010, there were 520,000 import lines, which is the whole matrix of what we actually import into this country as far as timber and wood products go. These come from 120 countries and through 22,000 importers. And of course, there's an extensive range of product that is imported, everything from sawn timber to complex wood manufactured products. The 120 countries span the entire risk spectrum from highly risky to riskless and everything in between. And it is therefore at the moment quite difficult to detect illegally sourced product because the readily available measures are not very good risk indicators. So we need data. We need more on the regions that product comes from, the countries they come from, the supply chain, the chain of custody, the robustness of the legality assurance system that the importers are using, and so on. All of these constitute additional data that we need to make the Act work better. Here's another photograph, this time somewhat more sophisticated barcode method for tracking and following the progress of individual logs through barcodes. This is from Forest New South Wales, but it's a system that's replicated by Vic Forest and other forest agencies. So where's the industry at in all this? Well, the proposed model and the proposed approach look to the industry quite positive, and there's, as I say, a great deal of support for the Act within the industry in Australia. It's a graduated compliance response model. The due diligence aspects are built into the existing legality assurance scheme and into the state and country regulatory regimes. Regulated wool products cover a large amount of high-risk imported product, and it is that we need to turn our attention to as the Act begins to take effect. Enforcement and monitoring at the moment are based on existing biosecurity and customs framework, and actually there's a lot of work to be done on that. And it builds on industry engagement and industry expectations. As far as the future goes, we believe that the government needs to educate the public about the Act and about everything that drops out of the Act, particularly importers. So there's a need to inform Australian industry, and particularly importers, of the requirements of due diligence, legal liability, and so on, and to ensure the international appreciation of our own domestic regulatory regime. There are a number of reasons for that, but one is the fact that Australian producers, as distinct from importers, are often the target of poorly thought through consumer protest campaigns directed by a number of non-government organisations. Resources are needed to target effectively high-risk imported wood products as distinct from low-risk or domestic products. And we need effective screening for vexatious and malicious legal harassment, which only adds again to costs and makes the industry in Australia less competitive than it otherwise would have been. And of course, we encourage the department in its ongoing consultation on the implementation of the Act, which, as I said earlier, has been exemplary to date. Thank you.